Well, the Guardian's not holding any punches when they call Rings of Power a stinker and make the claim that the world's most expensive show, which looked like an episode of Hollyoaks, only with woeful acting, was so inept that every episode left you sniggering. That right there, ladies and gentlemen, is quite possibly one of the most entertaining snippets that I've read in the post season one haze of reviews that have been coming out over the last few days now that the show is officially finished. A lot of us are still covering Rings of Power. We've got questions, we've got rants, we've got cats like Lucas behind me who need answers just as much as the rest of us. That right, Lucas? His silent approval is proof enough for me. I'm Tim Anderson, aka Renfill, the bearded dwarven princess. And for those of you who have been around for a while, I've been doing Rings of Power rants and discussions since the show was first announced. And I've reviewed the episodes. I think most people would agree that I've reviewed the episodes in a very fair way because I did two different reviews of each one. I did the biased Tolkien fan review, and then I did the unbiased generic fantasy show review. One was much lower than the other one. But even the generic fantasy review never broke. I think there was a couple episodes that I gave like a 6 or 7, but overall it would probably be like a 4 or 5 for the totality of the season. Because there was just, as the Guardian has stated, just some stuff that was woefully inept, enough that it left most people chuckling, going, "Oh my God, what are you even trying to do?" Now, we're going to dive into this article today and talk about some of the other things and thoughts that I have around the show. But before we do, this is the call to action part where I say if this is your first time here, like, subscribe, hit the bell icon so you get more like this. Don't forget, we also do House of the Dragon. We're doing Star Wars Andor. We're doing the upcoming Willow show. We're doing Wheel of Time, a rewatch, and much, much more here on my YouTube channel. Plus, I do video games, and I have a Patreon where I do game development with my wife and my brother. So if all that stuff sounds interesting to you and you want to support the channel, we'll talk about it at the end. The simple way is right now as you're watching, drop a super thanks or join as a member. Great ways to get started. In the meantime, let's dive into this piece. Um, when this show debuted at the same time as House of Dragons, it said much noise was made about which show was going to attract more eyeballs. And there was another article that I read the other day, which is talking about the fact that Rings of Power drew in like 12 million viewers for its debut, whereas House of the Dragon pulled in 20 million, and it said that Amazon executives were shitting their pants because the obsession of Bezos and others is that they need Rings of Power to be a global phenomenon, something that people are just can't wait to watch, and that's something that Game of Thrones was and continues to be, as we've seen with House of the Dragon. Now, I'm a little bit late to the House of the Dragon watch and review. I just started watching it this morning, actually, as I'm recording this, which this is getting recorded on the 17th of October. So I'm a little bit behind the times, but I was busy with the Rings of Power stuff, so I'm just getting into it now and reviewing and starting the reviews this week. In any case, 20 million views versus 12.5 million views, it's clear to see that people are genuinely more interested in Game of Thrones or the House of the Dragon than they are Rings of Power. But why, considering the love that people have for the Peter Jackson films? I can tell you why, everybody. It's because, as The Guardian says, it's an inept, steaming pile of shit. It's just not any good. Now, it says here, according to Nielsen, it was a victory for Tolkien, with the Rings of Power viewers watching the first two episodes for 1.25 billion minutes, compared with House of Dragons' 741 million. However, the viewership was much more in favor of House of the Dragon. But it says, over the week, something strange has happened. House of the Dragon has sucked up the spotlight. It has attracted tweets, theories, memes, discussions, all in a rolling boil since the first episode. Meanwhile, if the Rings of Power has been seen anywhere, it's only in places paid for by Amazon. Billboards and adverts and special Amazon packing tape adorned with the show's logo, but in terms of spontaneous, organic excitement and conversations, it has been a wilderness. And this goes back to they wanted Rings of Power to be the water cooler show. Lost was a water cooler show. Games of Thrones was a water cooler show. The water cooler show meaning this is the show that everyone talks about when they're on a break at work and they're around the water cooler. This goes back to the days before internet forums and everything else, but it essentially is a show that people are spontaneously having conversations about without being prompted. That's not been happening with Rings of Power. It's been only through paid advertising. And it's been pretty blatant too. Even during the final episode, people have been reporting that they got pop-up ads during the final episode of Rings of Power that they couldn't get away from. They're paying subscribers and they can't get away from it. It's ridiculous. Says now that the first season is finally over, there's one clear answer. The Rings of Power just isn't very good. It's quite often isn't anywhere near good. Says the reviewer says there are moments in almost every episode where I found myself sniggering into my sleeve at how inept it is, and all of these misgivings were massively underlined by the finale. Which, by the way, I managed to find at least a couple of stars, like 2 out of 10, 3 out of 10 in most of the episodes in terms of lore leading up to that season finale. But you want to know how much I gave, what the score I gave the season finale was? A 0. And I stated that if I could, I would have given it a negative review because the season finale was so bad and broke the lore on so many levels that it didn't even resemble anything remotely like Tolkien or Middle Earth, the Middle Earth that I know it. It says here, Friday's final episode promised to answer the question at the heart of the first season: who is Sauron? Was it the evil orc everyone called Father, the man who fell from the sky? Was it the evil woman who looked like Curtan from this country? Or was it the man who spent the entire season hanging out with Galadriel and was obviously Sauron all along? Who knew? There's no point in actually telling you the identity of Sauron because if you watched, you know who it is. And if you don't watch, you don't care. And if you like collecting decontextualized spoilers like Strange Little Presents, then you will have Googled Rings of Power Who is Sauron 1 second after the episode had finished airing and been assailed by thousands of online publications screaming out his identity for clicks. I am guilty of that, as everyone else is, ladies and gentlemen, because I make a living on YouTube, and that's how it works. Um, it says here, good Kelvin cannot function on who shot Phil Mitchell cliffhangers alone. That might be the destination, but the journey also has to be enjoyable as well. And in terms of both plot and presentation, The Rings of Power simply hasn't cut the mustard. Huh. Biggest issue, the one that caused the bulk of the snickering, was the acting. This is a show with a sprawling cast blasted across a number of locations, and there's no consistency whatsoever. People don't seem to have been told what show they're acting in. It's bizarre. Now, I previously talked about this in the video I did earlier this week, where I said the first episode of House of the Dragon blew the entire season of Rings of Power out of the water. One of the reasons being the acting alone, because the acting of the people in Game of Thrones is top notch. We're getting actual performances from people, whereas everything we got in Rings of Power was like caricatures, especially the Harfoots. And the the only redeeming qualities maybe Elrond and Durin and that's about it. But the most of the rest of them were just parodies, caricatures. And here it talks about largely thanks to the thrilling, urgent Morfydd Clark, who clearly felt the sting of everyone's spoke. The Rings of Power came off as a pretty good prestige drama, but at its worst, oh boy, there was some Toast of London level acting on display, some Sherry Breath regional theater matinee performances stinking up the place. So I don't want to single out any individual actors, partly because it would be cruel, but mainly because I suspect it's the fault of the directors rather than the actors. I 100% agree. Good actors can make bad material look good, but it requires a good director in the first place. It says Friday's episode, some of the smaller parts appear to have beamed in directly from a 1983 unaired episode of Doctor Who. All right, now this part I don't quite agree with. It says Bear McCreary's ever-present score was syrupy and phoned in as if he fell asleep on the fantasy preset on his keyboard. I don't necessarily agree with that. I like Bear McCreary's stuff, but point in case, they've dumped $1 billion into this show, and it is frustrating, as the writer here says. It's frustrating that there's so much potential here. I just don't have it in me to watch anymore to see if it's ever realized. Well, never fear, because I'm going to be doing it for you, because this has become a major component of my YouTube channel as I continue to grow as a content creator. So I'm still continuing to do rants and discussions. We'll be covering season 2, along with House of the Dragon, Willow, Star Wars, Wheel of Time, and all sorts of other shows here, along with the video games that I pursue. So if you like that kind of stuff and you want to keep getting more of the same, like, subscribe, hit the bell icon. And like I said at the beginning of the video, if you want to support the channel like all of our existing supporters here on YouTube and Patreon, super simple. On these premieres, do super chats and stickers. Plug in whatever amount you want. cup of coffee, $10, $50, a Ferrari. Make it whatever you can afford. It's a great way to support. Just consider me like your Hulu or your Netflix. Beyond that, you can do super thanks. It's the same system, same idea, just after it's been uploaded. You can also join as a member of the Adventurers Guild. We have 3 levels of membership here on YouTube with private videos, polls, and other fun stuff. There's also the Patreon page where my wife and brother are building our own fantastical world in a video game format with a book series. So hopefully they'll check all that stuff out. And I'll see everybody in the next episode. Until then, stay safe.